The champagne bubbles in my flute tasted like ash, but I forced the smile anyway. My face aching with the effort as the flash of a society photographer's camera caught the hollow victory in my eyes. Across the crowded penthouse terrace, high above Manhattan's glittering grid, my sister Eliza lifted her own glass in a mock toast, her smile a razor-sharp curve of triumph. This was her party, her celebration for guiding the family through a difficult transition, as the glossy magazines would put it. The same magazines that, 6 months ago, had chronicled my spectacular, humiliating fall from grace. The photo of me standing stunned on the courthouse steps. The headlines branding me the inheritance thief. The pitying whispers that followed me through grocery aisles. All of it, a meticulously crafted lie. The call had come on a Tuesday. My husband Leo's voice, breathless with disbelief, cracking through the speaker of my office phone. Amara. I just inherited my uncle's fortune. 800 million. Pack your things, we're leaving tonight. That promise of a future, of freedom, of a life beyond scraping for client approvals in a gray cubicle, evaporated in the toxic sun of a single revelation. Leo was found dead in a hotel room. An empty pill bottle beside him, a fabricated suicide note citing overwhelming guilt for embezzling the inheritance. The money vanished, traced to offshore accounts I supposedly helped control. My reputation was shredded by a narrative so perfect, so damning. Only someone who knew my deepest fears could have woven it. And as I stood at that party, a ghost in my own life, I felt the cold, hard shape of my phone in my clutch, and within it, a single audio file, recorded by a forgotten smart home device the night Leo died. A file that contained not his despair, but Eliza's calm, chilling voice arranging his murder, and the theft of everything that was ours. I met her gaze across the champagne flutes and canapes. And for the first time, I didn't look away. And that was the moment I knew the real revenge begins now. The rain on the taxi window smeared the neon of 6th Avenue into bleeding watercolors, a perfect mirror for the internal chaos I had to keep caged beneath a placid surface. I had played my part at the party, the chastened, fragile sister. Grateful for Eliza's magnanimous forgiveness, her support, during my legal troubles. The performance left a metallic sickness in my throat. The cab smelled of stale air freshener and damp wool, a far cry from the jasmine-scented air of the penthouse I had just left. The penthouse that should have been mine and Leo's. Our dream had been simple, a quiet place upstate, a studio for his painting, an office for my writing, a life built on creation, not consumption. Eliza's dream, it turned out, was empires. She had always been the sleek one. The one who understood that power wasn't a thing you were given, but a fabric you wove from connections, secrets, and the subtle, public evisceration of threats. I felt the weight of the phone in my coat pocket, a digital lodestone. The recording was my quiet universe, my singular truth in a world she had rewritten. I didn't just listen to it, I absorbed it, until the waveforms were etched on the back of my eyelids. The thump of a door, Leo's voice, confused. Then rising in anger, Eliza, what are you doing here? Where's Amara? Her reply, smooth as chilled vodka, she's not coming, Leo. We need to talk about the structure of the trust. Sign these, and this can all be very civilized. The scuffle, the sickening crack, a muffled groan. Then her voice again, not to Leo, but to someone else, cool and instructional, the injection. Make it look like the pills. And transfer the funds through the Cayman route we discussed. My sister's digital signature is already prepared. The click of her heels fading away. 47 seconds of audio that held the heat of a star, capable of burning her world to cinders. My own world was a small, shabby apartment in Astoria. A place Eliza would never deign to visit. The windows rattled with every truck that rumbled over the Triborough Bridge, and the lingering smell of my neighbors' cooking was a constant, greasy reminder of a life reduced. I worked a data entry job under a false name, a ghost in the system, saving every spare cent. The revenge I planned wasn't a knife in the dark, it was a slow systemic dismantling. Eliza lived in a fortress of reputation, influence and cold, hard capital. To storm it directly was suicide. I had to become a termite, chewing from the inside. I started with the periphery. The lawyer who had miraculously produced the damning trust documents, a man named Arthur Croft. He had a taste for vintage sports cars and a secret gambling habit that bled cash. The security consultant who had testified to the impenetrable digital security of the estate's accounts, a woman named Lynn, who had a dormant addiction to OxyContin following a skiing accident, an addiction her pristine LinkedIn profile never mentioned. I tracked their routines, their vulnerabilities, not with the clumsy tools of a private eye, but with the patient, invisible skill of a researcher, who had nothing but time and rage. I became a phantom in the city's data streams, a silent observer in the digital shadows they cast. The first move was a whisper, not a shout. I rented a mailbox under a shell name and sent Croft, on elegant, untraceable stationery, a photocopy of a decades-old disciplinary hearing from the Bar Association, one he had buried, alongside a current photograph of him entering a private poker club in Queens. No demand, no threat, just the evidence, laid bare. The following week, I attended a bland tech conference where Lynn was speaking on cybersecurity. During the Q&A, I asked, from the back of the dark room, a question about protocol for employees with access to sensitive medical data. My voice altered by a simple filter on my phone. I saw her perfect composure flicker for a microsecond, a crack in the ice. I was applying pressure to the fault lines in her foundation, gentle, tectonic pressure. Meanwhile, I curated a new identity. Amelia Vance, a quietly wealthy freelance art consultant with a background in European auctions, a woman with a polished, slightly melancholy air. I used the last of my real savings to buy a single, exquisite vintage dyer suit and cultivated the mannerisms of old money. A certain unhurried grace, a way of listening that seemed both deeply engaged and faintly bored. I needed to get close to Eliza's circle, to the charitable foundation she used as both social lubricant and money laundering conduit. The Healing Horizons Foundation. Gala was my entry point. I wove a story of a recent, tragic loss of my own husband, a story that mirrored the one she had fabricated for me. A shared language of grief that would appeal to her narcissism. The night of the gala, held in the cold marble atrium of a museum, I felt my pulse in my throat, a frantic bird against a cage of silk. I saw her before she saw me, holding court near a massive, unsettling modern sculpture. Eliza was elegance weaponized, a column of ivory silk, hair a dark, severe bob, her jewelry not flashy but authoritative, a single emerald the color of a deep, stagnant pond. She was laughing. A sound like ice clinking in a glass. When our eyes finally met across the room, I offered a small, tentative smile, the smile of a woman recognizing a kindred, wounded spirit. She excused herself and glided over, her gaze assessing, calculating the social value of this new, unknown entity. Amelia Vance, I said. Your work with the foundation is so inspiring. It's a beacon, truly. She took my hand, her grip cool and firm. Eliza Thorne. A beacon is only useful if it guides ships to safe harbor. She replied, her eyes never leaving mine, searching for the lie. We spoke of art of loss, of the emptiness of large apartments. I let a single, perfectly timed tear well, but not fall when speaking of my late husband, William. I saw a spark of recognition, not of me but of the narrative. She had written this script, she found comfort in its familiar beats. By the evening's end, I had an invitation to lunch at her private club. The trap was set. I was no longer the ghost outside the window. I was in the foyer. The club was all dark wood and hushed voices, a temple to discreet power. Over salads we didn't eat, Eliza spoke of the burdens of stewardship, the loneliness of command. I listened, mirroring her posture, offering murmured sympathies. You understand, Amelia, she said, leaning forward slightly. In our world, what looks like strength is often just the scar tissue over what was taken. The hypocrisy was so vast it was almost breathtaking. I nodded, my face a mask of empathetic understanding. Sometimes, I said softly, the only way to heal is to reclaim what was stolen, not with violence, but with precision. She paused, her fork hovering, and for a heartbeat I wondered if I'd gone too far. Then she smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile of kinship. Precision, I like that. She began to confide in me, not secrets, but philosophies, her belief in the natural hierarchy of people, her contempt for weakness, her view of morality as a useful fiction for the masses. I was her confessor, her echo. I learned of her fears not of the law, but of irrelevance, not of exposure, but of a flaw in her own impeccable logic. I met her associates. The sleek fund manager whose eyes lingered too long on the waitstaff, the aging socialite whose charity was a front for her own tax evasion. I documented it all, not with a spy's camera, but with a consultant's detailed notes, building a map of her ecosystem. The psychological warfare was a double-edged sword. Playing Amelia, bathing in Elisa's toxic confidence, began to stain my own soul. I dreamed in her voice. Sometimes, in the mirror of my dismal bathroom, I saw the ghost of her sharpness in my own gaze. The line between performing strength and becoming something cold like her blurred in the quiet hours. My revenge, which had once felt like a clean flame, now felt like wading through a tar pit. I was becoming complicit in my own degradation. This internal conflict reached its peak the night she took me to her penthouse study, a room of glass and steel with a view that owned the city. She poured 2 glasses of an obscenely expensive scotch. "I'm considering a new venture," she said, her back to me as she looked out at the skyline. "A hostile acquisition of a green energy firm. The founder is sentimental. Attached to his legacy, he needs to be encouraged to see the larger picture." She turned, her eyes gleaming with the reflected city lights. "I think you could be useful in persuading him. You have a gentle touch." She was asking me to become her instrument, to use my crafted persona of empathy as a weapon. It was the ultimate test and the ultimate perversion. I sipped the scotch, letting it burn, and said, "I'd need to understand him completely. His pressures, his dreams, his vulnerabilities." She smiled, seeing not refusal, but strategic thinking. "Exactly. But the game was changing. My subtle pressures on Croft and Lynn were having unintended effects." Croft, paranoid and rattled, went to Eliza. I learned this from a careless comment she made over lunch, a warning veiled as a story about disloyalty. Lynn, meanwhile, had quietly re-entered rehab, creating a vulnerability in Eliza's security apparatus. The ecosystem was becoming unstable. Then, the twist that severed my last tether to caution, I discovered, buried in a cascade of shell companies, that Eliza wasn't acting alone. The money, the murder, it had a silent partner, her husband. The blandly handsome investment banker I dismissed as a trophy spouse, Gregory. He was the architect of the financial maze, the one who knew how to make $800 million disappear and then reappear, sanitized as venture capital. They were a perfect, monstrous symbiosis. Her psychological cruelty, his financial sociopathy. This revelation shifted everything. Taking down Eliza alone would only be cutting the head off a hydra. Gregory would simply slip away with the wealth, a grieving widower, and rebuild. The final act required the recording to cease being a secret and become a weapon in the open, but on my terms. I planned a confrontation not in a dark alley, but in the brightest, most public place imaginable, the annual board meeting of the Thorne Family Trust, a stuffy, by invitation, only event held in a Park Avenue skyscraper boardroom. Using the access and knowledge I'd gained as Amelia, I ensured I was on the guest list as a legacy consultant. I also anonymously invited a select group of financial journalists, hinting at a major scandal involving inheritance fraud and a death. On the day I dressed not as Amelia, but as myself, or the ghost of myself, a simple, severe black suit, no makeup to hide the pallor of my grief. I arrived early, slipping into the back of the room as the board members, Eliza and Gregory, took their seats at the long, polished table. Eliza held the chairwoman's position, a queen on her throne. The meeting drawn through approvals of minutes, financial summaries. Then, during a discussion of asset reallocation, I stood up. The room fell silent. Eliza's head snapped toward me. Confusion, then a dawning, glacial horror as she recognized the woman she had broken, not the curated confidante. "Point of order," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the hushed room. Regarding the disposition of the late Leo Vance's inheritance. Gregory half rose. Security. Eliza placed a restraining hand on his arm, her eyes locked on mine. She saw the small, old model phone in my hand. She understood. The game was up, and it was no longer a game of whispers. My name is Amara Vance. I announced to the room. 6 months ago, my husband Leo was murdered. The inheritance that was rightfully his was stolen. The narrative you were fed was a fiction. Murmurs erupted. Eliza's smile was a death rictus. My dear. Lost sister, the grief, the charges we forgave you. This is a sickness. I ignored her, addressing the board, the now attentive journalists at the door. The truth is in this room. It's in the fraudulent trust documents authored by a compromised lawyer. It's in the digital footprints of a security expert paid to look away. And it is here, I said, lifting the phone. In the voice of the person who ordered the murder. I pressed play. The room was tomb silent as Leo's confused voice. Then Eliza's calm, instructional tones filled the space. The injection. Make it look like the pills. I saw the blood drain from Gregory's face. I saw the board members recoil. I saw Eliza for the first and only time, truly falter. The mask didn't crack, it shattered. A raw, animal panic flashed in her eyes before she rebuilt the wall. But it was too late. Everyone had seen it. The recording was the detonator, but the public shame, the collapse of her meticulously constructed reality, in front of the very peers whose respect she craved, was the explosion. In the chaotic aftermath, the shouts, the scrambling security, the flashing of press badges, our eyes met one final time. There was no speech, no grand declaration. Just a silent transfer of understanding. I had not come for her with a knife or a gun. I had come with her own weapon, her voice, her arrogance, her belief that she was the author of all stories. I had used her own plot against her. The police, spurred by the very public evidence, and the sudden willingness of Croft and Lynn to deal, moved quickly. The empire of lies crumbled into dust and indictments. I stood on the street outside, the cold wind biting my face, the city's noise rushing back. There was no victory in it, only a vast, hollow quiet. The revenge was complete, but Leo was still gone. The money, what was left of it, was a cursed thing I wanted no part of. I directed it to the charities Leo had loved. I moved to a small town on the coast where the sky was big, and the internet connection was slow. The haunting didn't stop, it just changed shape. I no longer dreamed of the recording, but of Eliza's face in that final second of unmasking, not as a monster, but as a terrified, hollow woman staring into the abyss she herself had dug. My revenge was not a salve. It was a scar, a permanent, cold knowledge of how far I could go, of the darkness I could touch and use and still, somehow, walk away from. The balance was restored, but the scale was forever broken. I had won, and in the echoing silence of that win, I finally began the long, slow work of learning how to live with the person my vengeance had forged me into.